Welcome to episode 91, Balance. It's a topic I touched on in episode 45, Recycling is Important, and hope to in episode 93, Motivation, at least based on the closed captioning. We all try to find balance in life. It's a natural desire because it comes from nature, which constantly moves to restore balance to life on earth. You could almost say balance is a law of nature. What's weird is how, on an individual basis, most of us humans, internal joke, let's ignore the inhumans for now. Most of us humans try to find a balance in almost everything we do. What we eat versus don't eat, the amount of work versus play, waking hours versus sleeping hours, private time versus hanging out with friends, everything really. Individually is one thing, however, internal joke, nice pun, because collectively it seems humans are totally anti nature when it comes to balance. Balance involves reaching an equilibrium of sorts. There has been much discussion about how, until the industrial age, the Mother Earth, for the most part, was able to keep or restore balance on the planet, even after catastrophic events. And before humans became the dominant living species on the planet, it didn't take nature long to put any overbearing species or organisms in their place. You destroy your habitat or your food supply or your host, and you wither accordingly from the imbalance you created. Humans, however, seem confident that they do not have to live by this supposed law of nature. So we seem hell-bent on destroying our planet by any and all means, including through constant conflict and the destruction of not just property but people. Inequality, you could say, by definition, means a lack of equilibrium. Or you could say that inequality breeds conflict, which means no equilibrium. But let me expand. Internal joke. Don't blow up now. Balance, remember? Well, some time ago I read this article in the New York Times titled Why the Sanctuaries Are Actually Prisons by Lydia Paul-Green. It's something I've touched on. It's something I'll touch on again in episode 93. Wealthy countries became rich by exploiting poor countries directly when they were colonies and subsequently indirectly by installing or sustaining despotic rulers when the former colonies became supposedly independent. Such rulers continued the transfer of their country's natural resources to rich countries while amassing great wealth for themselves, their families, their friends, and their sycophants, while leaving the vast majority of their country's populations poor and needy. The internal imbalance created has led to never ending conflicts in these countries. The external imbalance has created external conflicts based on ideology or as well as creating mass migrations as the poor and needy seek a better life. The global inequality imbalance created by the wealthy countries have now come back to haunt them in the form of massive amounts of refugees and immigrants seeking equilibrium in the imbalance of inequality. You know, the irony of the immigration problem facing many wealthy countries is ironic. Actually, doubly ironic. The thing is, you can't contain inequality. So these countries that became rich or stay rich at the expense of countries that became poor or stay poor are having to deal with a most unexpected consequence. You could say it's sort of a reverse invasion. Internal joke. You sure you want to use that word? But if so many people weren't so poor in certain countries, there wouldn't be this continuing effort of people risking life and limb to get to wealthier countries. But then think about it. The wealthy countries that attract immigrants are draining poor countries of yet another resource. Some of their most enduring, most courageous, most industrious, most daring, most creative people. When it was a trickle, it was okay because the wealthy was still benefiting so much from people exploitation. Now that it has become a flood, it's a totally different story. But here's yet another irony of the whole situation. Many of those countries are experience Many of those wealthy countries are experiencing population declines. There are few that provide more benefits. There are few things that provide more benefits in these countries. There are few things that provide more benefit to these countries' economies long term than an influx of cheap industrious workers. What do you think slavery was all about? What do you think near slavery in today's world is all about? There are so many people in so many countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East working for pittance to support the lifestyles of the rich and famous, as well as the not so rich and famous in those same countries, as well as in wealthy nations in North America and Europe. Here's another irony. In the United States, while some politicians and other folk are loudly clamoring to control immigration at the southern border, many businesses in farming and service industries across the country are quietly clamoring to let in immigrants due to the shortage of cheap labor. But let's face it, conflict generating inequality isn't confined to poor countries. Politicians in Europe and America wouldn't be able to use immigration and race as wedge issues if there wasn't so much internal inequality in their countries in the first place. It's easy to make race a wedge issue in majority white countries. A massive influx of non-white a massive influx of non-whites can make the native population feel overwhelmed, and nobody likes to feel overwhelmed. But I truly believe that if the planet is to survive, humans will have to overcome racial and ethnic animosities. And I think trying to maintain racial and ethnic purity in any country or community is unnatural and will ultimately fail. Why? Because you cannot isolate yourself from forever. You cannot isolate yourself forever in today's world. And like with everything else, nature seeks balance. In fact, if you have been following my blog, to me the likelihood is that in 100 years, if we last that long, African nations will likely become much more desirable in terms of places to live, both economically and especially environmentally. And the result is that reverse migration may well cause them to have much less overwhelmingly native populations than they do now. In terms of immigration issues closer in time, I can point out that the last 5 years have seen two major European powers make huge consequential decisions pertaining to immigrants. Issues with immigrants was a prime driver that caused Britain to exit the European Union, while on the other hand, Germany absorbed about 1 million immigrants from the Middle East. In 20 years, if we last that long, Germany will have a less homogeneously white population than it did in the past, but will likely be the country with one of the highest per capita GDPs in the world. And Britain? Britain may well be voting on whether to return to the EU. Just remember, to respect Mother Nature, we need to give her what she likes: balance.